everybody. Welcome to InPsight Radio. I am your host, Danielle Egnew, and you are a fly on the wall too everywhere. How are you guys? Hey, I am so excited about today's podcast, you guys. It's so goofy. However, I figure in a world with so many weird things happening right now, let's take the focus off of all the human monsters and let's put the focus on some of our mythical monsters, or are they actually mythical? You know, I was having a really tremendous conversation the other day as we roll into summer here, and I was having a conversation with a friend of mine about which monsters were real and which monsters were fiction. And we actually had a really fascinating conversation, and I was mentioning to my friend that quite a bit of the monster lore that we have that's spread out all over the globe really corresponds. I mean, one monster is a lot like another monster, and you have to kind of think about how the world used to be. I mean, you guys, it's not like there was Instagram way back in Greece and Malaysia and all of these different countries where for thousands of years, these cultures reported terrifying beasts that did terrifying things. And it's fascinating to me how many of these beasts are actually real creatures. And it's how people have, if you want to say they matrixed maybe some of the monster attributes to make them into something that they understand. But honestly, you guys, it's really fascinating. So my friend actually inspired me to do this particular podcast because Lord knows we have enough real life monsters that are human beings running around doing terrible things on this planet. And we have some real angels on this planet as well doing beautiful things. So I thought I would turn our attention to the mystical for just a bit here and go over the top 15 world monsters that have caught people's attention over the millennia. And I'm going to add in, with the help of the angels and also some of my psychic files I've got here, what these beings are and which ones are real and which ones are just kind of made up out of the human psyche to matrix our fears into something that is definable, right? Okay, so we're going to start with a beast that not a lot of folks in this part of the world know about. And it's the Pontianak, and it's from Malaysia. The Pontianak is really, it's like a ghost vampire, okay? And it's interesting how many of these amazing creatures, these cryptozoological creatures that I'm going to reference here, have vampiric tendencies. And we're going to talk about that. Like, why are they all vampires? Why do we have these vampires springing up all over the world? It's really strange. But anyway, the Pontianak from Malaysia is this weird vampire ghost. And it's supposed to be originated, I guess, from a woman who was giving birth, okay? And she died while she was giving birth. And of course, the energy of a woman dying in childbirth to the ghost as it becomes a ghost is spiteful and it's furious. And it's really interesting because if you think about the movie The Ring, remember The Ring, you guys? It came out, it was so scary. The Ring, that long, skinny, black-haired ghost with the one eye that would just peek out. Well, that's fashioned after the Pontianak of Malaysia. And that ghost is generally portrayed as just a really pale-skinned woman who has long black hair, just like the creeper in The Ring. Ew, right? What a creepy movie that was. And I mean, if you think about the Ring character, it's a dead ringer for this beast because the Pontianak's hair, it just kind of wisps down over her shoulder. She peeks out from her, her one eyeball's peeking out just like the creature in The Ring. And of course, the Pontianak has a white dress. She's got the long, creepy, pointy fingernails. And of course, as many of these female ghosts do, they entice males or anyone else in by acting like a helpless, lovely woman. And then, of course, the guys come in there to help them. And the Pontianak rips your guts out and eats all your guts. And what I think is interesting is that, again, this is a Malaysian spirit, okay? That's a vampire thing that eats your guts. At the same time, it also only comes out under a full moon. So that corresponds with our werewolf lore of the European area. Of course, they were coming out eating your guts, and they only came out in the full moon. So again, the Pontianak comes out under that full moon, and she basically makes her presence known with the cries of little babies. And so you could like go out in the woods and you're hearing little babies cry and then creepy, awful feminine laughter in the background. And basically, there are witness reports, right, of this beast, of the Pontianak of Malaysia. And they report that you get this screaming sound that gets louder. And it states that this Pontianak is going away from you. And if it gets really, really quiet, then you know she's gone. So it's interesting because, look, we've got the werewolf lore comes out in the full moon. It eats your guts. It's a creepy lady in a white dress. We also have the woman in a white dress lore that really you hear about along the side of the road. You hear about the lady in the white dress who's wandering in the road crying. And you got to wonder, what the hell is this lady in the white dress? What the hell is the Pontianak of Malaysia? Well, it turns out, as I look into the ethers here, that the Pontianak of Malaysia is actually a shape-shifting elemental that would indeed at times get frustrated with the human beings' ravaging of nature and would go after human beings. Now, the baby eating part, that was a little bit of a mythology here, but I mean, hey, that's pretty creepy. I think it probably was an equal opportunity eater back then, and little babies can't run away, so what are you going to do? You're hungry. There's a baby. You're an elemental. People cut down your forest. What are you doing? So the Pontianak of Malaysia is based on an elemental character. The interesting thing is the werewolf that we, read about from Germany and Transylvania and all of these Eastern countries, the werewolf is also based on an actual elemental being. And the werewolf has a lot in common with the Mexican chupacabra, which comes out again on the full moon and sucks the blood out of everybody and looks like a mangy, weird dog with a skin disease. I mean, that's the chupacabra. So if you look at this, there seems to be an elemental being out there that used to kind of go for it and eat chickens and people and do all kinds of things. And it was generally in relation to the disturbing of nature. Okay. And again, if we're thinking about the mythologies, the Pontianak eating only babies and having to be a woman, I think that's our brain matrixing this weird stringy hair looking thing, which again appears as a banshee in Irish culture. It appears as the white woman or the woman wandering in the white dress. In a lot of cultures here in the United States that talk about being very freaked out and seeing a wailing white dressed woman on the side of the road. So I do think our brain will matrix sometimes something that we don't understand. So anyway, I had to throw that in there though, because the Pontianak of Malaysia crosses off a lot of boxes of a lot of other creatures seen around the world with a lot of similar behaviors, right down to the eating of the guts. So anyway. So, moving on, we've got the Ammit. And now you might recognize Ammit as an Egyptian god. It's the Egyptian devourer of the dead. And Ammit was kind of like a gatekeeper to hell, basically. And Ammit has this head that looks like a reptile. And it's the goddess who is pretty horrific. And the front of their body looks like a lion. And the rear of their body is portrayed a lot like a hippo. I mean, would you be pissed if that was you? I would be. I'd be like, look, I've got this lion body up front and this hippo, I'm trailing this hippo body in the back. What the hell? But the head looked like an alligator. And Ammit was also, of course, just called the devourer of the dead. And pretty much if you were ruled to be not a very good person, you got sent to Ammit. Ammit would devour you and kill your soul forever. Now, what's interesting is the head being a crocodile. Obviously, in Egypt, there were crocodiles in the Nile, okay? So it wasn't a big stretch to have crocodiles eat dead bodies that would get floated down the river or fall into the river or be put on a reed raft and floated into the river. And unless you were Egyptian royalty who was being mummified and having your guts taken out and put in little jars all over the place, oftentimes when people died in Egypt, just a plain old person, they would put that person's body on a reed raft and float it down the Nile. And you just gave it to Ammit. You gave it to the gods. And obviously, people would be sitting on the side of the bank and watching dead bodies get eaten by crocodiles. So it wasn't a big stretch that Ammit would be the god that dealt with the dead and looked like a crocodile. Now, the interesting part about this is that during the time that the Egyptian culture was thriving, there was a lot of off-world influence. I mean, Sirius AB came and really helped out with the design of the pyramids and many other things. We see the very, very literal Egyptian culture depicting these 10 and 12 and 18 and 20-foot beings with little Egyptians sitting on their lap that were supposedly adult male-sized. And of course, when the English Egyptologists who were archaeologists went in and looked at these images, of course, what they said was, oh, right, well, the Egyptians were grandizing themselves. And of course, the pharaohs had to be bigger than everybody else. So they painted the pharaohs or portrayed the pharaohs as these large beings having little bitty humans on their lap because the pharaohs, of course, were important. And the normal or common people were the plebes and were smaller in stature in these grandiose versions of themselves. You guys, the Egyptian culture was excessively literal, okay? If you look at Egyptian hieroglyphs and you look at them, you can tell that it's a falcon. It's not an eagle. It's a very specific image and very precise image of that bird. The images that the Egyptians used were very literal images. So to have an Egyptian carve a 20-foot being with a little bitty man on its lap for scale was literal. So what does this have to do with Ammit? Well, Ammit, of course, is this a mythical, I want to call it Egyptian god because that's what it is, but it also was kind of a mashup of the Egyptians of the day watching their dead being eaten by crocodiles in the Nile that they floated down on rafts, and also some of the off-worlders that they encountered. Now, back in the day, guys, the Egyptians worshipped the gods that came from the sun. And we know that the folks from Sirius AB were down here helping with the pyramids. They were power generators back in the day. We've got some really fascinating archaeological depictions of these 20-foot tall beings that had very specific features. They were also very much like the 20-foot and 18-foot tall beings that were carved into the Mayan ruins and some of the Incan ruins. And I shouldn't say ruins, they were temples at the time, but now they're ruins. And it also depicted very large human beings, also with very thick brows, very prominent noses, very thick lips. So there was a very similar appearance all the way across the world of these very, very tall beings, which is quite something. So we get to Ammit. What does this crocodile eating human beings have to do with off-worlders? Well, at the same time that these off-worlders were occupying Egypt, we also have what we like to call reptilians, and that's not actually what this race of beings calls themselves, but we had reptilians, which are beings that have a reptile-looking face to us. We don't have much other reference for that, so we think they look reptile-y. And these reptilian beings, who are actually called Hastat, but these reptilian beings were not known to be the nicest beings on the whole earth. As a matter of fact, we see heavy depictions of them in the Sumerian culture. And in the Sumerian culture, they actually look like they kind of look like birds because their helmets had these funny cones on the front that helped them breathe our oxygen. They had a more ammonia-based atmosphere. And so they needed a little bit of conversion help in breathing. But it would make them look kind of like a bird, and then if you saw their hands, they were claw-like and they were scaly, so I could see how they were depicted as birds back in the day. Anyway, these reptilian beings once in a while would eat people. They would just flat out eat them. They were begged not to and finally stopped. But, people are kind of juicy and easy to catch. So there you go. So Ammit, of course, which is the Egyptian god of the dead, having its crocodile head, is also interesting that it was the judge of the dead, because oftentimes when the reptilian beings were eating people, it was after a sport, or maybe the loser lost or whatever, and they ate them. So they kind of looked at people as a bit of a pet or a toy back in the day. And of course, if we go down our off-worlder history, then the folks from Sirius AB came in there and said, hey, you can't eat people, not cool, don't be doing that. But anyway, Ammit. So the crocodile god, who also kind of sort of resembles our reptilian folks who did eat people once in a while when they failed a test. Good times on Ancient Earth. So then, we've got the Hydra. We're moving on. Number 3, the Hydra. And we've heard of the Hydra, right? That's the Leviathan serpent of Greece. And the thing that's cool about the Hydra is that there are so many creepy things in the bottom of the ocean that we are just not aware of. And the Greek people were heavy fishermen and sailors, and they had a navy. And so their sea lore with the great god Poseidon was wide and it was deep. It was a big deal. And the Hydra is really, really creepy because it comes up out of the water. It's humongous. It has several heads, and, it's a water-dwelling beast, obviously, that has blood and breath of poison. Okay, that's the Hydra. And it also has the distinct characterization of being able to regenerate itself. So if you cut off its head, it would grow another head. Okay, so they were really, really hard to kill, the Hydra. And it's interesting because you hear about the Hydra with Hercules and Hercules' second labor, where the gods, sent the hero in to slay, and of course Hercules was the hero, to slay the monster that was the Hydra. And the thing that's interesting about the Hydra, guys, is that what sea creature is huge and has regenerative properties? The giant octopus, the giant squid. And if you cut off an octopus tentacle, it grows back over time. It takes it a while, but it grows it back. The giant squid does the same exact thing. Now, the giant squid will squirt ink in your face, and it's not something you want to breathe or eat. It's pretty noxious. So though I've not found an actual Hydra creature with multiple heads that you can cut off psychically in the bottom of the ocean, I have found, when I'm scooping the ocean psychically, some pretty big, terrifying creatures down there that we don't know how to quantify. And many of them are cephalopods, which are squid or giant octopi. So the Hydra, though not a literal creature with multiple heads that I can find anywhere, these angels can find for me, is really based off of the really terrifying creatures that sometimes the Greek fishermen would pull up from the depths. And you got to remember, these fishing vessels were not the giant fishing vessels of today. They were much smaller. So these vessels would come up, and sometimes when they were pulling up these huge octopi, and there are huge octopus at the bottom of the Mediterranean, it's one of the biggest octopus breeding grounds in the world, and some of the largest octopi are located down in the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea, as well as the Pacific Northwest. Did you know that? There are huge octopi in the very bottom of the Puget Sound in the Pacific Northwest. And I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but years ago, and I believe it was like the 1920s or 30s, right in that time frame, the wind was whipping so fiercely through the channel in the Puget Sound around the Gig Harbor area that it twisted the Narrows Bridge. And you can see footage of this. It must have been the 20s or 30s because they have video footage of it. It twisted the Narrows Bridge so fiercely that the Narrows Bridge fell dead into the water and sank to the bottom of the very steep and very deep and black and cold Puget Sound of the Pacific Northwest. Well, if you sink an entire bridge to the very bottom of this incredibly deep channel, octopi like to live in little crevices, so it creates a huge breeding ground for octopi, especially really, really big ones. So, though I have not been able to find an actual hydra with multiple heads that when you cut off, it will regenerate the heads, I have found some really creepy creatures at the bottom of the ocean that are massively huge, massively large. I found creatures that are in a subplate ocean. There is an ocean that exists beneath the plates of the earth. And I've been talking about this for a long time. You know, there's a lot of hollow earthers out there that think there are realms and worlds inside of the earth. And there are hollow caverns and there are hollow spaces on the inside of the earth. It's kind of hot in there. However, there are also massive oceans that are underneath the plates of the earth because water sinks, you guys. So it's not like the earth is this watertight ball with all the ocean water on the top. As a matter of fact, our deepest oceans pale in comparison to the depth of the oceans that are below the crust of the earth. And that's just the truth. So I haven't been able to find an actual hydra, but I have found some creepy, crazy creatures that live in these depths at the bottom of the sea. And it is very likely, especially as I look back through these angels and look back through time, very likely that the hydra was fashioned after giant octopi or giant squid that would just squirt ink in your face and it was noxious. So giant squid and the hydra. Then we're moving on to the famous Baba Yaga of Russia. Number 4, the Baba Yaga. And there have been recent films starring the Baba Yaga, which of course in the Hollywood versions of the films, the Baba Yaga is this evil witch that goes after people. And very, very much like our Malaysian friend, the Pontianak, Baba Yaga has pointy, creepy nails and skinny, creepy hair, and of course is a woman. And the Baba Yaga was a character that parents would talk to their children about. Don't go into the woods. You're going to get stolen by the Baba Yaga. And honestly, she was a witch, right? Of course. But the thing that's interesting about the Russian culture is they also referred to her as a nature spirit, a forest spirit. And a lot of times the Baba Yaga would sit with the children and tell them beautiful stories about life and try to teach them life skills. So the Baba Yaga wasn't always trying to eat little children like the Pontianak was. It was trying to teach children lessons. And the Russian culture also really thought that the connection to nature was very important through the Baba Yaga. And of course, a lot of people made her into a big antagonist. But again, it was the witch that offered guidance, or a nature spirit that offered guidance. You know, honestly, when I look into it, this is an elemental being that actually exists out in the forest, those dark, big, huge, vaulting forests of Russia and that part of the world. This nature spirit is a real being. And I don't actually see it taking children and eating the children. I more see it scaring children out of areas that they shouldn't be, which is exactly what elementals do. If you encounter elementals in the wilderness, they will scare you out of areas that are not good for you to be. And human beings shouldn't be wandering around in high EMF areas anyway. That's electromagnetic frequency. If we get into an electromagnetic frequency area and the EMF is really high, that can disturb human brain function. It can make your heart skip beats. It can do all kinds of things. Well, of course, the Earth is a giant spinning magnetic ball, right? And as the Earth is spinning around, it creates what we call vortexes, which are wrinkles in the electromagnetic field, which cause wrinkles in space-time. We also like to call these wrinkles in space-time vortexes. So when these vortexes open up and our elemental beings can walk through from the ether in which they live or the different dimension in which they live, They want to keep people out of their doorways, and they don't want little kids running into these doorways and getting lost. Brigadoon. Brigadoon is, of course, the classic musical that's all about walking into a fairy ring with your coat on backwards and ending up in the fairy realm. And it's interesting because our lore, you guys, our lore is based on experiences. Our myths are based on experiences that people have had. And the brain, again, tries to make an explanation for these experiences. And pretty soon we've got fairy rings and we've got the Baba Yaga and we've got all these things. However, the Baba Yaga at least is an actual nature spirit. And I don't honestly see the Baba Yaga being terrifying. I see it being helpful. So at least the Russians knew enough to say, hey, guess what? This is not exactly a terrifying beast, but it became terrifying because it's what they used to keep their kids in the house. And the Baba Yaga would scare little kids out of vortex areas. I've been scared out of vortex areas by elementals here in Montana. I've been wandering around and all of a sudden it starts to feel really creepy and I'm like, what the hell? And I look around and you can't really quite put your finger on why it's so creepy, but you can tell it's a high EMF area, and you might start hearing some clicks or some pops or something trying to scare you out of a region. So, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. The Baba Yaga is not necessarily a monster, but it was put on a monster list. Welcome to being misunderstood. So going down to number 5, we have the Draugr, which is the Norse zombie. I want you to think Game of Thrones and winter is coming and all those beings, the White Walkers that came from the north and came through the wall and came down into the countryside and, of course, had a showdown with all the humans. And really, the White Walkers, I think, were deeply, deeply fashioned after the Draugr, which also is kind of bluish or gray. It looks like a zombie. If it kills you, you could be resurrected as a Draugr. So it just reminds me a lot of the White Walkers. Now, what's interesting is that the Norse culture has a lot of beings that are elemental beings. And these elemental beings were scary as heck, and they did wander amongst the people. So I do see that the Draugr is based upon an actual elemental being that used to wander and still probably does, but stays away from folks up in the forests. And this being that was, would attack people and then the people would become the Draugr. What I'm seeing in this elemental kingdom is that if the Draugr took you, then you were going to be kind of pulled into that ether. And we just discussed fairy rings. And once you were pulled into that ether, it would extract some moisture from the skin. It would extract some life out of the body. And the Draugr would just keep you around. So you didn't want to run into these creatures because once you encountered them, you had to stick with them. They would keep you and they would kind of suck the life force off of you. And there's a lot of scientific reasons for that with elemental beings. But the Draugr, I think, went on, to become this mythological creatures that was said to possess magical powers, and it would shapeshift and it would have premonitions and it would control the weather. And shapeshifting, of course, is also a big attribute for our elemental kingdom. And I've actually seen an elemental being. I won't eat up the podcast with it, but I've seen an elemental being that changed into a bear out of nowhere. Just, it looked like a little black bear, brown bear, and it was not a bear, it was an elemental, but it looked like a bear. So, of course, the shapeshifting, the premonitions, weather control, our elemental beings are all part of the cycle of nature. So they are in cahoots with the elemental patterns of nature and the clouds and the electromagnetic energies in the ionosphere that shift our weather systems. So again, the Draugr, being like the Norse zombie, appears to be a real creature that hasn't been popping out much. It roamed a great deal more when there were less people on the earth, according to these angels and according to my psychic research here as I look through the ethers. The interesting thing about the Draugr is it also ate people. It had a thirst for flesh and for blood, of course. So now we're going back to the Pontianak of Malaysia that eats people. And it would eat human beings and drink their blood. So what's interesting, again, is we've got a few humans who wandered into a bad space, came across a hungry elemental, and that was the end of it. But isn't it interesting? We've got these creatures that suck the blood out of people, suck all the blood out of them. And the Norse culture, in order to appease the gods, used to take volunteers. They didn't capture people. They would take volunteers who offered themselves to be hung upside down and have their throat slit, and they would bleed into the forest, and their blood would be a willing sacrifice to the gods. So there was a tie to blood and these beings, human beings, watching something like a Draugr eat a person and saying, oh, they must want our blood. Well, let's just bleed out into the forest floor. Which leads us to the Alp. This is a German creature that looks a heck of a lot like an evil tree spirit, okay? I mean, the Draugr, you can kind of honestly think White Walker, you got it. The Alp looks like a creeper tree spirit. And the Alp is, once again, something that lives in the forest, and it, once again, is a vampiric spirit. So we've got a vampiric spirit in Malaysia. We've got a vampiric spirit up in the Norse area. We've got a vampiric spirit down here in Germany. And it also shapeshifts into cats, pigs, dogs, butterflies, snakes, you name it, it's going to shapeshift. So we've got the Alp and we've got the Draugr, which are both forms of elementals that are shapeshifting like mad in two different parts of the world, all right, that are being seen as monstrous creatures. And I'll tell you, elementals are kind of creepy looking. I mean, they probably think we're creepy looking. They probably think humans are weird with our wide, round eyes and our constantly flapping mouths and our hairless bodies. They probably think we're terrifying, man. I'm not kidding. Anyway, the Alp is always depicted as a male demon, which is interesting. You know, just like the Pontianak is always seen as a female, and the Baba Yaga is always seen as a female. The Alp is always seen as a male demon, and it often appears to human beings in their nightmares, okay? So think Freddy Krueger, only a weird-looking, creepy, pointy teeth tree spirit. And people used to believe that the Alps would cause sleeping problems. And of course, as things that appear in your dreams, nobody could kill it, just like Freddy Krueger. Now, what's fascinating about this is the Alp appearing in your dreams, affecting your sleep, being a demon that is vampiric. And it doesn't necessarily talk about Alps sucking your blood out. It refers to the Alp through lore as a vampiric spirit. That can also be energy vampires, okay? So we've got two things going on here. We've got the creepy elementals, which, did eat people back in the day, maybe still will if you get in their way. And the propensity to suck the blood out of people or suck the blood out of beings, shapeshift. And what's fascinating about the Alp, though, I have to tell you, is that it comes in your sleep. It's a sleep monster. We also have some off-worlders that would visit human beings while they were sleeping, and we call it sleep paralysis and all kinds of other things. So not to confuse elementals with off-worlders, they're very different. Oftentimes elementals don't like off-worlders because they're not from here. An elemental's job is to manage nature and the planet. So an off-worlder would present as an intruder or an issue. However, this male demon that comes in your sleep and oppresses your sleep and steals your sleep, that's also characteristic of some of our grays. And the Alp is depicted as a gray being, but it really does look more like Pumpkinhead. If you watch Pumpkinhead, remember Pumpkinhead? Ed Hardy. You remember Pumpkinhead? I loved Pumpkinhead when I was a kid in the 80s. God damn you. He already has, Ed Hardy. He already has. Remember that movie, you guys? Oh, it's so creepy. I love Pumpkinhead. Anyway, Pumpkinhead kind of looks like an Alp. So we've got the sleep paralysis of off-worlders coming in for abduction purposes. We've got the elemental, I'm going to suck your blood out, and I'm creepy, and I come in your dreams and I shapeshift. So yeah, It is confirmed that the Alp was more of an elemental, and also some of the matrixing got folded in to some visitations from our off-world friends. And of course, it was just blamed on the Alp. Because if you've got a forest being or you've got some dude flying around in a spaceship, I think we're going to default to forest being as being your demon. That whole flying craft thing is probably a little much for ancient peoples. So yeah, going with the forest creature. Now, speaking of demons, we've got number 7 here, which is Lamashti, which is the mother of demons, Lamashti. And Lamashti, before I even get into the description of Lamashti, it was brought to me that there was an actual demonic being that they called Lamashti that was awful and would surface occasionally and terrorize people. And this is a demon goddess, okay? That, if you can call it a goddess, but it's a demon thing that is from Mesopotamian mythology. And Lamashti was just creepy. It was this hellish hybrid that was always depicted in drawings and carvings as pregnant, but it had thick hair and it wore a bra with 2 human skulls over the top of it, basically. And it had a tail like a snake and great big large wings and 3 eyes and taloned feet. And its head was reported to be like some kind of a hyena or a jackal. Sometimes it was like a snake or a hawk. Now, we've also talked about the fact that our reptilian beings would look like a bird because they wore these helmets that would help them breathe here. So it's interesting that sometime Lamashti appeared with these pointy nails and pointy fingernails and whatnot as this being that was a bird. So Lamashti oftentimes, I believe, was also, those could have been very easily the reptilian beings that folks mistook, that were pretty gnarly and again, did eat people and terrorize people at a certain point in history. Yet there was a lot of negative dark spirits that came up through that Mesopotamia, through Samaria. We talk about jinn. This would fall in the jinn category, Lamashti. And if you think about a demon, guys, they really are just the junky cousins of the angels. And the junky cousins of the angels are kind of creepy looking. I do these angel portraits and I'm working on the last of them right now for a while. And angels are weird looking and they will appear to me to try to matrix in to look human a little bit. Sometimes they look really human, depending on the person that they are appealing to. And these really human beings, or looking beings, are for our benefit. Angels don't look human. They look like monsters. They're weird looking, and they look like big columns of light. So we can't really relate with what they look like. But this Lamashti, okay, from Mesopotamia, would be considered a demonic being. And so with the multiple eyeballs and the creepy talons and that's, if you're talking the angelic realm, and again, any demon is a junky cousin of the angels, you got multiple eyeballs, you've got wings, you've got just weirdness going on there. So this was a being that was a demonic being. However, I also think at times there were the reptilian beings who would be mistaken for Lamashti, just because they also had scaly skin. They had 3 pointy fingers with talons on them. Reptilian beings, okay? So, of course, the Lamashti was eating flesh, eating humans and drinking their blood. Of course, we've got lots of blood drinking here. And it was said to terrorize pregnant women and children, and that it imposed itself on pregnant women. And oftentimes people blamed Lamashti for miscarriages, okay? So, and it, much like our Malaysian friend that, of course, was blamed for eating all the kids, the Pontionic, the Lamashti is also blamed for eating a lot of babies. And I have to say that demonic creatures just would do disturbing things just to do it. So I wouldn't put it past this being to just eat babies just to freak people out, honestly. And it talks about kidnapping infants, the lore, and how These, they would, this creature would breastfeed these infants with poisonous milk, and then it would eat them and drain their blood, blah, blah, blah. So again, the Lamashti, again, is a real thing. But as people fear demons less, they debate. They abate. They go away. They debate. They debate with you that they're still there, but they abate. They go away. Demons are attracted to fear. So the more you fear a demon, the greater strength you give it, the more it's going to show up. The less we fear these creatures, the more we're going to see them come out into basic obscurity. So we see less demons hanging around because less people are afraid of them, quite honestly. The more we have religion, the more they teach people to be afraid of demons. Are demons real? They absolutely are real. Yet you don't need to fear them. Just don't engage them. It's like a shark. Sharks are real, but you don't want to bleed into the water and attract them. That's a bad idea. We don't want to attract a demon and then be afraid of it because they eat pain and fear. So they'll keep hanging around. It's like bleeding into the mouth of a shark. It's going to keep eating you. That's just what they do. So if you don't want demons around, you don't fear them, you don't pay attention to them, you don't engage darkness. In very rare occasions, there will be geophysical attributes that open up portals or vortexes that makes it easier for demons to cross into this third dimension. And this really is a dimension that's hard for them to navigate. It's hard for them because we're full of light down here. It's a light dimension. But once in a while, you get demons that wander around and you get a Lamashti that comes up and terrorizes people. Not as much as she used to, but a Lamashti is an actual thing. So don't dink around with that one. That's kind of gross. And then we move on, of course, to number 8. We move on to Japan, which is the kingpin of all creepy creatures. I mean, look at the Godzilla franchises. They've got so many monsters that come up out of the ocean. Of course, Japan is a country that is riddled by, it's on the Ring of Fire. It's riddled by all kinds of tsunamis and earthquakes and volcanoes. So the lore in Japan, due to all the destructive geophysical attributes, has lots of monsters. Because where we have unknown geophysical or otherwise features, we have the human brain matrixing monsters to make sense of oftentimes science or features that we don't know how to describe. But the Ushi Oni in Japan, this is great. It's the Ushi Oni. And Japanese folklore is pretty much lauded worldwide because they've got some of the best monsters ever. And the Ushi Oni is an ox demon, okay? And it's one of the mythical monsters that haunted Japan way back in the day, and it specifically targeted fishermen, okay? And it has different depictions in different regions all over the world. So it's interesting. There is this weird thing that comes up out of the ocean, which was the Leviathan in Greece, and it's the Ushi Oni in Japan that comes up and basically attacks fishing vessels. And the Ushi Oni, it's more like a crab with a body. It's a crab legs on the body of an ox. So that's kind of weird looking. Okay, but crab legs, long spindly legs. We could look back to octopi or giant squid in this regard. And, the Ushi Oni has a lot of tusks and flying squirrel-like wings. So if you look at some of the sea creatures, like flying squirrel-like wings, if you think of a bat, okay, bat wings, there are flying fish. And they have these big, long wings. They don't look like bats, but they do come up out of the water. And the Ushi Oni, with its tusks and its flying wings, I don't necessarily see a creature that looks exactly like that, but there are some very monstrously weird creatures that have washed up onto the shores of Japan and the surrounding areas. And these creatures come out of the Ring of Fire. They come out of these deep subterranean oceans. And they're weird looking. If you Google weird sea creature around oil rig, deep sea oil rig, you're going to see this thing that is swimming around, and it basically looks like a giant sheet, just a giant rubber sheet. and it's flapping around down there. And it is a type of sea creature that you don't see very often. It comes from the depths, but it's weird. It doesn't have eyes. It doesn't have gills. It doesn't have a mouth. It's just this flapping sheet. Like, think of a jellyfish, except this thing moves. And I could see how somebody could look at that and look at it as a giant wing. So though I'm not seeing an actual Ushi-oni, I am seeing many creepy creatures that come from the deep sea that could be made into this weird creature, including but not limited to the creepy giant squid. And there are weird water elementals, you guys. Just as there are land elementals, there are water elementals. And we hear about these being mermaids and calling sailors into the sea. And yeah, sailors could have been delusional or dehydrated or drunk on so much rum they thought that a manatee was a woman. But there are also, guys, there are water elementals that we would call mermaids, or beings that swim that are humanoid looking. They exist. And they're not necessarily the Ushi-oni, but they exist. So just because the Ushi-oni is sort of a mashup I'm seeing of many creepy creatures, it doesn't mean that we don't have creepy creatures in the ocean. And again, Japan is famous for just putting together 1,010,000 different weird creatures they saw and making a Godzilla out of it. So that's kind of cool. Number 9 is the Knuckleavee. The Knuckleavee from Scotland. The Knuckleavee. And the Knuckleavee is a creepy creature that looks like a skinned human being that is fused with a skinned horse. And it has a massive head, like its head is 5 times bigger than its body. It's just huge. This weird, hairless, skinless looking being. And it was called the Devil of the Sea, which is very interesting. Although it wanders throughout the forest, the Knuckleavee of Scotland. And it's creepy because it's a mythical creature that, well, it's not that mythical, but it has this skinless body and it holds a poisonous breath that really claims to kill animals and crops. And it has crazy, wicked superpowers that can cause really bad things to happen. All right. And it's worth noting here that only an old spirit that is known as a sea mither, or the mither of the sea, M-I-T-H-E-R, okay, can manage this creepy Knuckleavee through the summertime. So this mither would come up out of the ocean and chill out the Knuckleavee during the summer. So basically the Knuckleavee would sort of disappear during the summer, and then it would wreak havoc all over again. And this Knuckleavee of Scotland was also recorded in Latin manuscripts, okay, that were on the Orkney Islands of Stronsay during the 16th century. And Ernest Marwick, which was an Orcadian writer and folklorist, had an assumption that this Knuckleavee, this evil creature, came from the sea and was similar to the Norwegian Nok. So what we've got here is we've got this beast, this thing, and we're talking about water elementals. That is a water elemental. And it's interesting because it talks about this creature being controlled by a mither. And the mither was a sea monster, basically. And of course, when you're talking about Scotland, you've got the English Channel out there, and it's pretty rotten and deep and very choppy waters and kind of a scary part of the water. So there was a lot of fishing vessels that went down in storms and other catastrophes out there, getting breached on rocks that people couldn't see. And one of the things that is fascinating here is that the mither would have come by and collected its elemental beings. Elemental beings also migrate, just like whales or sharks or anything else. So it's interesting that the mither would control the Knuckleavee during the summertime. And really, as I look into it, this water elemental would be migrating and it would go somewhere else. So Scotland will get a break from the Knuckleavee. And then it would come back when it was time to migrate back up to the waters. that it hung out in. So I think that's so fascinating. As a sea creature, we've got this water elemental, and it's quite something. So the Knucklevee of Scotland appears to be a real thing, which again, being, quote, controlled by the Mither, was just as a water elemental following a migration pattern. Very interesting there. Ugh, it's creepy looking though, man. This thing crawling out of the sea looking like a skinned beast. Of course it looked like a skinned beast or a skinned horse or whatever. I mean, sea creatures don't have lots of skin. Have you ever seen these fish that look like they have skin and not scales? It's just creepy. Sea creatures, man. Whoa. We know more about the ionosphere of the planet than we do the bottom of the ocean. And I know we all know that, but it's still just mind-blowing. Okay, moving on to number 10 is a low-hanging fruit character that many of us have heard about in many types of lore, the Chimera from Greece. And the Chimera, of course, is a mythical creature. It's a 3-headed hybrid monster. It has the body and head of a lion. We have lots of lion heads in this. Body and head of a lion, and it's got its head on it. It's got a head on its back and a tail that ends in a snake. And this being, again, does not appear to be a real being. It appears to be a fully mythical being that the Greeks made up as, honestly, just a child of two gods that was just this awful, hideous thing. And it was an analogy for debauchery. The Chimera was a monster. It was an analogy for a forbidden love. And you didn't want to be a chimera. The chimera was a hideous thing that was basically cast out. So the chimera is more of a psyche projection of human beings. I don't see that there was an actual chimera or that it was based in something that was real. However, it is still creepy, the chimera. Then we're going all the way down to Africa, because Africa is the cradle of civilization and such a mystical continent, so mystical. And we have the Zulu Tokoloshi, the Zulu Tokoloshi. And this thing is a full-on elemental being hardcore. It reminds me of the little people of the Pryor Mountains here in Montana, but it's taller. And it's from South Africa. And it resembles a gremlin, and it creates chaos. And it's usually summoned by witches or shamans or people with magical powers or whatnot. Again, I'm going to take a small pause here. The little people of the Pryor Mountains here in Montana are small and gray and bald-headed and have pointy little teeth, can cause havoc or mayhem. My wife and I are building, well, the contractors are building a home, but we're building a home in Bridger, Montana. And these little beings kept stealing these bright orange clamps for the cupboards, just stealing them. It was crazy. And these creatures, of course, being elementals, they can be seen as mischievous. If we look at the people of the hills or the little people of Ireland and Scotland, they call them the fae or the fairies, and you give them treats so they don't punk you all day long. You give them cream and goodies and sugar. I mean, I want to be an elemental. I want to be an elemental. I want people to give me cream and sugar and goodies and all kinds of stuff. I think that would be amazing. But no, I'm just a lowly human talking about elementals. Speaking of which, getting back to the Tokoloshi of South Africa. So it was summoned again by witches, shamans, people with magical powers. And the Tokoloshi could be, it was said that it could be controlled by cutting off of its eyelashes. Good luck. How are you going to hold down something and cut off its eyelashes? And by giving it curdled milk. And we were just talking about Ireland and Scotland and the fairies and how people would leave out cream and dairy products for them. So this thing would, be appeased cutting off its eyelashes. Who does that to anybody? That's just raw. But anyway, giving it curdled milk. And apparently, like elementals will, it would keep tormenting or hounding people. And elementals will do that too. Oftentimes I would get called out in hauntings in California, supposed hauntings, to go rid a house of a ghost. And it was an elemental being. And these folks had paved over their backyard and put up a swimming pool and cut down all the trees, and the elementals were upset. So they were wreaking havoc with the plumbing system. Okay, so when I see that the Tokoloshi is basically an elemental of the same ilk in South Africa, and it probably is going to be punkin villagers if they're doing something that's basically disrupting nature. So there's lore that you can put bricks underneath the bed to control these beings, and you could be protected. Probably bricks under the bed would just make sure it couldn't crawl under the bed and scare the dickens out of you when you got out of bed. But you can't really actually control an elemental with a brick, just so you know. They are not scared of bricks. Is the Tokoloshi a real creature? Bing, 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 bing. Yes, it is. It is an elemental in South Africa. Moving on to number 12 is the famed Banshee of Ireland. The Banshee, of course, we've heard of banshees, the woman who comes and wears a veil and a dress and wails in the night to warn people that someone is going to die in their family line. Banshees are, again, they are earth spirits. They are nature spirits, and banshees aren't always bad. Sometimes they can come and bring comfort to those who are grieving. So if you can think about a banshee, it's a nature spirit, but it works with the angelic realm as people are getting ready to cross over. And again, you guys, you have to remember that universe or God or whatever you want to call the spirit that's working for our behalf, that spirit always has emissaries that will come and meet us in transition periods. That it doesn't want us to get lost. And yes, if you want to call it heaven, sort of does suck us up through a Hoover vacuum and into the afterlife, and off we go, and it's fabulous. However, banshees show up to foretell someone's passing. And in spite of the fact that a banshee has kind of a spooky, ethereal presence, she's actually bringing well wishes to people. And she wants to let people know that this person in the family who's going to die will be met in the afterlife and will be escorted over. Are banshees real? Bing, bing, bing. Yes, banshees are a real thing, although Hollywood has made them into terrifying creatures rather than our helpers. And I always get so upset about the Hollywood portrayal of a lot of our elemental and mystical creatures, because a lot of them are not here to harm us. Some of them are. Some of them are. And we need to be aware of that, because not everything is a nice creature. Like if we're talking about the Lamashti, the mother of demons, that Mesopotamian demonic creature wasn't here to be our friend. It was here to eat you. However, when you're talking about things like a Zulu, Tokoloshi, or you're talking about a banshee from Ireland, they're not here to harm us. They're here to work with us. And I think human beings have a long way to go. We got a long way to go, you guys, before we figure out that we're part of a larger kingdom, including an off-world realm that's full of beings that just want to help us out with everything from consciousness to technology. So these creatures try to pull our attention to the fact that we're not alone here, and we make them into monsters. Welcome to interfacing with humanity. God. All right, we're going to move to number 13, the Mananagal of the Philippines. Now, this is interesting because the Mananagal, that word, it comes from the Tagalog language, and a Tagalog word that means replicating or splitting into two, duplicating, okay? So you've got this creature, the Mananagal, that duplicates itself. And again, it's resembling a vampire. It's got the transformation capabilities. It's got the bat wings. And it transforms at night. It comes at night and it grows wide. It'll split in two and become very wide. And as this mythical creature, of course, well, as they call it, a mythical creature, of course, it eats people, all right? And it eats people at night. And it sucks the blood from pregnant women. Here we got another bloodsucker, and with the pregnant people. And it drags the fetuses from the blood of the victims with its long, elongated tongues. What's weird is, again, this is kind of running along the lines of the chupacabra, which is said to have a big elongated tongue that rips things out of bodies and like a straw and pokes the chupacabra of Mexico that pokes into the straw tongue, pokes into the neck of chickens and goats and human beings and sucks all the blood out. Well, this creature, the mananagal in the Philippines, that widens itself and has these big bat wings, also has this same behavior. And it's interesting, the bat wings also go to the Jersey Devil. We've talked about the Jersey Devil or the Mothman in the East Coast, the Northeast coast of the United States. And that's out in the very, very thick forests of Connecticut, New Jersey, and central New York. These are some really wooded places, guys. And they've got a lot of big vortex patterns. And our indigenous people, our original people of this continent, just would not go into certain parts of those forests. And they would hang talisman on the outside that said, hey, stay out of here. There are some serious vortexes and some serious elemental beings. Of course, the Jersey Devil and a Mothman. Jersey Devil is an elemental creature, which resembles greatly this mananagal, except for the fact that it's not known to eat people and suck its blood out with its little straw tongue. That would be a chupacabra, but a chupacabra doesn't have wings. So we have a similar type of creature here and a similar genus, if you will, of elemental that has this behavior that flies and does these weird things. A Mothman, you guys, just as an aside, it's not really on the list here, but the Mothman prophecies, Mothman is an interdimensional being. That would fall more under our off-world creatures. They're interdimensionals that would come and try to contact us about the future, and that never went so well. The Mothmen were a little confusing and a little strange, and we're basically coming through portals that were opened up through nuclear testing. Not even kidding, back in the day. So Mothmen are a different thing. My God, the mananagal of the Philippines has a lot more in common with the flying chupacabra, and it is an elemental being, okay? But of course, whenever we have a being that's sucking blood out of something or eating something, and we don't know what it looks like, we always make it into a demon. And I'm sure that maybe there were some pregnant women that got run down by this thing. However, I think there was also a lot of slaughter of pregnant women back in the day, and especially a lot of tribal slaughter. People who didn't want the baby coming into the world, people who didn't want someone else's family to grow large. And it was known that if you were warring with another clan, they would break in, find your pregnant ladies, and pull the fetus out of them so that you couldn't propagate your family line. I mean, that's pretty terrible. So that was a big fear that women had back in the day, that a warring clan was going to come out and rip out your fetus. I mean, good times back in the old world. So, of course, these monsters would take on some very human monstrosities. And the mananagal, of course, which is an actual elemental creature, was then imposed with a lot of human creepy attributes like ripping out fetuses. You gotta love it. Then we go around to China. We haven't heard much from China. And I think this is fascinating because the Bai Shi, which is Baize, the Bai Shi from China, it's a supernatural beast. And it resembles a white ox that has 6 horns and 9 eyes and wings. Guys, this beast, it appears to people, even though it's creepy looking, as a good omen and a symbol of good luck. And it only appears in a country or an area, it's like a blessing, where a leader is virtuous and wise. And it speaks lots and lots of languages, and it encounters people who are virtuous only. That's the only people it encounters. And though it's a creepy looking beast, this beast is considered good luck, and it changes your fate, and it brings a blessing. Let's look at what it looks like. The Bai Shi, okay? A white ox, a white big body, 6 horns and 9 eyes and wings. And its eyes are on its head and 3 are on its broadsides. Guys, they are describing an angel. That is an angelic being. When you have all the eyeballs and all the wings and this weird looking body and all these different horns or actually energetic appendages that come out of this being, that is an angelic being. That's what they can look like. I mean, if you read in the Old Testament of the Bible and you read about these angels appearing, and they have all of these eyeballs and these eyeballs in their wings and these eyeballs on their side, and they see everything. Angels are weird looking, guys. And the second I read about this beast, the Baishi, I'm like, oh my God, it's an angel that's appearing to people and it's blessing them. And the Chinese can actually handle a little variance in how something looks. So the Baishi wasn't needing to appear as a person or appear as a white light or appear as something other than what it is. And so I found that very interesting. So this mythical beast actually falls under the angelic category, the Baishi. So last but not least, and I've referenced it all throughout the podcast, is the chupacabra of Puerto Rico. And I keep saying Mexico because honestly, in Mexico, there are a lot of chupacabra sightings as well. But Puerto Rico was really one of the big birth grounds of the chupacabra, which basically looks like a werewolf with a skin disease, glowy red eyes. Sometimes it's said to look like a reptilian being or a lizard being, okay? And reference our reptilian beings eating people once in a while. They don't really do that much anymore, but maybe they do pop down and let their kids run around and eat people. I don't know. I don't talk to the reptilians that often. I don't know what they're doing. But honestly, this thing is an elemental being, okay? And it really was depicted in pop culture more prominently in the 90s, the chupacabra, because there were all kinds of goats and chickens that turned up dead in Puerto Rico, and the goats had no blood in them. It was all drained. And the folktale, of course, was all over the United States and Mexico, where there were lots and lots of goat and chicken deaths where they had just bled out. And the weird thing about the bleeding out of the chickens and goats and whatnot is that there was no blood anywhere else. Like there was no blood on the ground. There was no footprints. It was just, they were just drained out of blood. And the chupacabra, of course, as I had described, it kind of looks like a mangy wolf or a mangy coyote. And it's got a long, skinny straw tongue that it sucks the blood out of people with. So, we're encountering the long, skinny straw tongue in all of these different creepy beasts all around the world. So is the chupacabra an elemental? Yes. Are elementals running around eating livestock? Not generally, guys. Not generally. So you have to wonder, what were these farms doing in the 90s to attract an elemental to it? That's sending a message and eating the goats and chickens and saying, well, you're depleting my food source over here, so I'm going to deplete your food source. I mean, that's what elementals do. They work in a balance. They're not just going to go and eat you for no reason. That's a demonic thing. So they're going to do something for a reason. So as we've learned today, guys, that there is a majority of these creatures are based on actual real life elemental beings or demonic beings, or based on some off-world attributes or actions, or angels, or they're just flat and made up because we need something psychologically, like the chimera, to be the depository for all of human beings' misdeeds and rotten things, the cast out one, the chimera. We've also noticed that there's a lot of demonizing of female creatures. The Baba Yaga, which is, of course, just the Russian nature spirit, which overall helps little children, but was made later into an evil witch that eats kids. So it's fascinating, right, to learn about all these creatures all over the world, from Norway to China, from the Alps in Germany, and what they do and the similarities that these beings shared, even though back in the day when we're talking mystical creatures and being afraid of things that go bump in the night, nobody ever saw something in Norway if they lived in Germany very often. That wasn't a big occurrence. You weren't hearing about the Norse gods back in the ancient days because you didn't leave Germany. So this was a super fun podcast because there's so much going on in the world that's so weird and so strange, and even weirder things are coming. My God, just wait till we get further into the summer. Wait until we get into July. Weirder things are coming. However, when we get a chance to see what exists in our earth, it is mystical and it is phenomenal. And we have this opportunity to allow ourselves to be open to the mysteries that exist around us every day without being afraid of them. Guys, thanks for hanging in there with me on this super fun podcast. I love running down cryptozoology and talking about what's real, what's not real, what's it based on, where did it come from. I love that stuff. I super love it. Thanks for hanging in there with me today through my June cottonwood allergies. Good times, good times. I always like the Marge Simpson voice, or we could also call it the Katherine Janeway voice. Chicote. Yeah, Katherine Janeway. We're going to go with that. All right, you guys, have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your month, and I will see you next podcast.